All right, hi everyone. It's Dan Deppin. Welcome to the Note Investor Podcast. And in this episode, I'm going to have a case study for you. I've actually got a number of case studies queued up that I'll be releasing here in the coming weeks. But this was one where there was just kind of a surprise that happened to it just the other day. So I thought it'd be good to go ahead and record this one while it was fresh. So this one is for a contract for deed that I bought in Dayton, Ohio. And Dayton's kind of become one of my main go-to cities because I've got some other notes there, got some relationships with realtors, got a pretty good team on the ground. So I kind of like buying notes in Dayton. I know that in Ohio right now there's a lot of concern around some of the legislation that's pending and it's given some people pause, but um, I'm still pretty comfortable with the state and with this city in particular. Dayton's got a lot of good stuff going on for it with the Air Force Research Lab, some other major employers. To me, it's kind of a good area I want to feel pretty comfortable in. And if you're watching on YouTube, I'll show some of the numbers, but if you're listening to the podcast, I'll do my best to, explain everything so it doesn't get, hopefully, not too confusing. But this contract for deed was actually one of 6 assets that I bought altogether from the same seller. And you'll find that some of the numbers on this asset aren't necessarily ones that fit my main model. I wouldn't say that I was super jazzed about all the aspects of this note. But what was kind of good about it was in one of my core cities, like I mentioned. This was a performing note that I ended up just buying from my self-directed IRA. But as part of this trade of 6 assets, I had some that went into my self-directed IRA, some that I did through my LLC, either through joint ventures with other folks or ones that I sold partials out of. So when you deal with asset managers, right, they're always going to tend to prefer doing as large a trade as possible. It's always easy for them if they can trade 6 notes at once or even 10 or 15 versus doing a one-off, right? Because if you look at a lot of the costs and time and brain damage to do a trade, it's not that much different if you're trading 6 notes versus trading 1. So if you can trade more, it's always better for them. It's also better for me as well. It's just more efficient. And it can also help you build a little bit better relationship with the asset manager. So even though in my sort of perfect world, this wouldn't have fallen right down the middle of my model, it was good enough and it helped make the whole rest of the trade work, which had some other juicier assets in it. And this was also very solid on its own. So in my opinion, sometimes people get a little too concerned with trying to make sure every single aspect of their deal is perfect. And I'll tell you, it's really hard to find a note where every little characteristic, every little parameter is exactly where you want it, and every exit scenario has a sky-high ROI. So sometimes you got to give a little bit. And this was an example of there. Although this was another example where things kind of worked out nice, and I got kind of lucky, and it ended up actually being better than I expected going in. Let's get into a few of the numbers on this. So like I mentioned, this was a contract for deed. The unpaid balance was just over $17,000, which is not really where I want it. Usually I like the unpaid balance to be at least 20 or preferably a lot higher, more like 40. If the unpaid balance is too low, it just kind of limits a little bit of your upside. However, the BPO value was 54, so there was a ton of equity in this. So I kind of knew, okay, as a performing note, even if it goes bad, it's bad from the standpoint that the unpaid balance is low, but you can recover those funds later because there's so much equity in the property. So I wasn't really too worried about that. Now the principal and interest payment on this was only $157, and that's a lot lower than what I would normally want it. Typically, I'd want this to be like $250 plus. And the reason for that is if your principal and interest payment is too low, then a bigger percentage of that is getting eaten up in servicing costs. Now, in this case, I was able to board the loan at Allied. They're only $18.50 a month, so not too bad, but still went into this losing over 10% of my principal and interest payments just due to servicing costs. which isn't great, but the return still works out, as I'll get into here in a second. Did have some delinquent taxes of $742, and actually don't recall if that was covered. There's money in that for escrow or not. Either way, I ended up exiting this relatively soon, so ended up not having to pay those taxes. This was a current loan with a steady pay history, so really wasn't too worried about it with that pay history, and having all the equity protection. So there wasn't really too much that was going to be able to go wrong on this loan. I mean, the only way this loan goes really sideways is if something goofy happens and the borrower stops paying, and I have to foreclose, and then I get the house back and find out that there's something horrific going on the inside where I really don't have all the equity that I thought I had. Like, let's say there's, black mold or water damage or, termite infestation or something like that. But the outside of the house was looking pretty good. Some of the porch work looked relatively new. There are a few flowers and stuff. There's some pride of ownership. So really wasn't too worried about that overall. And then also the rental rates in this area were $700. So that's nice from the standpoint that if I do end up having to take the house back, then renting it out is one option. But also from the borrower perspective, right? They're paying $157. That's their house payment for the month, right? If they decide not to pay that, they're not going to find a better deal unless maybe they can, move in with their mom or something like that. But so overall, not architected to be a home run deal, but pretty safe overall. So let's look at what kind of returns I'm estimating on this performing note. So I picked the note up for 11,866, so just under 12,000. This ended up being about 69% of the unpaid balance on the loan, which isn't bad for this. I paid more in some cases, certainly for performing contract for deeds. This one having the low principal and interest where the servicing costs are going to eat up more. I wasn't willing to go as high. So I bought this in early April of 2019. And then, as I mentioned, just bought this one for my self-directed IRA. So the game plan on this was just buy the loan, stuff it in my self-directed IRA, and basically forget about it and just accept the mailbox money and hopefully not have to deal with a foreclosure if it doesn't go bad at any point. And this would basically, even after the servicing costs, would give me initial yield at about 14%. And when I say initial yield, I'm talking about the payment of 157 minus the servicing costs of 1850 times 12 payments for the year divided by the 866 that I paid. That gets me about 14%. Now the actual return over time is going to be a little lower than that because part of that payment is going back to principal, and that principal balance erodes away over time. But anyhow, it's going to be in the ballpark of 14% over time, which isn't bad for my self-directed IRA, right? I mean, if I can get something on my self-directed IRA, it's north of 10%, and I've got all this equity protection and room to maneuver if something goes wrong. Yes, most people out there, they'll take a safe 10% and they'll take a safe 14% all day. So while I've definitely bought other performing contract for deeds and other notes where I've had returns that were higher, yields that were higher than that, this is not bad at all, right? So generally I'd like it a little higher than that, but this was good enough. And remember too, right, the key is this helped make this trade of 6 notes go together, and it helped me buy some other ones that I have in my LLC that I'm doing joint ventures on and sold partials on. So while I think the note deal, this one stands up well and makes sense on its own, it's also got this added value of it helped me get some of these other deals as well. And I'll probably end up doing case studies on some of those other notes in the future as well as I exit from those over time. Probably be a while though on those other ones. And of course, what ended up happening was about 3 months later, I got a full payoff on the loan. So the borrowers ended up paying this off on July 17th. So I was in this for just over 3 months altogether. So it's kind of funny how things work out on notes sometime, right? I went into this with the intention of just buying and holding it in my self-directed IRA, probably holding it for several years. And the deal ended up lasting 3 months because I just happened to kind of get lucky and bought this loan right before the borrower planned on paying it off. Now, I don't know why or how the borrower paid it off. I don't know if they got other financing or if they were planning on selling the property. I just got word from the loan servicer that, hey, the borrower wants to pay this off. And it was kind of funny was they actually asked me to fill out some things saying if I was going to accept a payoff. And I don't know why they have to ask me that, because yes, of course, I'm always going to accept a payoff in full all day long at a loan that I bought at some discount. So, but let's go through the numbers on the outcome. So my total cost basis was just about $12,500. So I mentioned I bought the note for $11,866. I had total holding costs of about $613. Never paid the delinquent taxes because that just kind of got taken care of by the borrower. But my holding costs, I had $125 for Quest IRA to place the investment, $100 for a BPO, I think $85 for a O&E report, $150 for a doc review, and then there were some other servicing costs and other miscellaneous odds and ends, but in for about $12,500. And then the total proceeds, there were some payments received minus some load boarding fees. So ended up receiving $394 in payments. And then the loan at the time of the total payoff was $17,078. So total proceeds were $17,472. So basically I was in this for about $12,500 and out for about $17,500 3 months later. So I ended up netting about $5,000. It was actually $4,993 to be specific, which gave me a 40% return in 3 months, which is awesome. So it's just kind of funny that I went into this deal, expecting this to be a, decent but not great return from my self-directed IRA, and it kind of turned into a home run unexpectedly at the end. And what's the annualized return on that? I don't know. I didn't even bother to calculate it, but if you make 40% in 3 months, that's high enough. So I was happy. So what are the lessons learned on this? As I do case studies, I always like to kind of go back and document, okay, what's the real takeaway from this? Are there things that I would do different? And this one was really smooth from the standpoint that, everything just kind of went my way. Really nothing that I would necessarily go back and do differently the next time. And as I get into some of the future case studies on this podcast, I am definitely going to have a lot of deals and a lot of lessons learned where things didn't just always go smoothly, where you got negative surprises instead of the good ones, or I did things that I would do differently the next time around. But this one was pretty smooth. So the number one lesson learned was that, sometimes you kind of get lucky. Sometimes things just fall your way. And like I said, I have other case studies where I think the lesson learned will be that sometimes you get unlucky. I'm not going to talk about that right on this one, but yeah, sometimes you buy a loan and it just happens to be right before the borrower is getting ready to pay it off, and you end up getting a big check, and that's nice. The second lesson learned is that while smaller balance loans have less upside, and in general, I'm not a giant fan of those, a smaller balance loan is easier for the borrower to pay off. So if you have a small balance loan, I think that your probability of getting a payoff goes up versus one that's, maybe 50K, because the borrower might be able to get other financing. They might be able to just scrape up the money to get the loan paid off. There's a lot of different ways that can go. So there can be some good upsides to smaller balance loans, not to mention the fact that you've usually got a lot of equity. So if things do go wrong, like instead of the borrower paying it off, the borrower has some kind of problem where they can't pay, or the borrower passes away and can't pay, or something like that, you've still got room to recover. And then the third and last lesson learned is that, you can get solid yields from performing notes with equity for your self-directed IRA. So even though there are other notes out there with some better characteristics, buying a performing contract for deeds, whether it's one you're buying on your own or doing a partial, or sometimes doing them as a joint venture, you can get really solid yields from that. If you can get 10% plus with some safety or some ability to recover if things goes wrong, that's really great. So this case study is kind of short and sweet. I've got some other case studies that are a lot more involved and in depth coming up here fairly shortly. And as always, if you got questions on this case study or just note investing in general, don't hesitate to reach out to me. You can always drop me an email at dan@fusionnotes.com, or visit my website, www.fusionnotes.com. So that's all for this one. Stay tuned. I'll have a lot more of these coming soon. All right. Thank you.